out the first series of talks called What is Aura. Next time, shoot out, sign up. One. Yes. Sign up, call back. Probably a break in February. Come back. First time we call. Hallucination or spiritual sight and insight. About clairvoyance of the inner worlds and some of the realities and difficulties of it. But this is the last one in the What is an Aura series. And if all the others were difficult, this one is possible. And one can only talk about completely transcending spiritual worlds, pointing. It's something that is always ineffable, that there are greatest spiritual minds that have been, have only pointed to the experience because it's something that our language can't bear at all. And what we're talking about are the worlds beyond any kind of phenomenal experience. As we've been talking about physical plane, that is divided into several parts of the major division, one being solids, liquids, and gases, and the other part being four ethers. And we've said that humanity has a physical body that relates to the physical world. The general principle is that in order to experience any world, you have to have a vehicle of it. And before you can creatively realize that experience, you have to recreate the laws of that world within that world. So that is an obvious difference. It's obviously clear that the body, even though it's made of the stuff of the solids, liquids, and gases, is very different from the cosmic body of God. So it's very light and very supple, quite directly on the physical stuff. We also said that relating to the etheric part of the physical world, the chemical part, we have a body that is made up of life energy. It allows us to take in into our own sphere, our physical body, to throw out what we don't want. It allows us to be lively, to grow, and to procreate. They on that way. We also have, as part of our etheric body, something carrying, carrier of the inner fire of the divine in terms of the warmth of our body, which is glory. We're also related to the carrier to our senses. We had something to take the outer expressions of the world, carry them inward and into our memory and our thought in the spiritual bodies. So we have a solid etheric body interpenetrating penetrating the physical and etheric body, we realize that a human being is not a vegetable. If we only had an etheric body, if we only had a physical body, we would be like a vegetable. Some people who are like that, don't have the desire body hatched, are indeed vegetable. All of certain types of psychological illness, call it, people are vegetating. They don't feel any feelings, they don't feel any emotions. They're almost sub-animal. There's no quality of affect at all. So, this is described as in the same way that the etheric body is made up of light and energy, physical is made up of form that exists. The desire body is made up of emotions. It's made up of feelings, desires, passions, all of those things. And it's like our physical body, we're all alike. Water float and just barely qualify and almost sink. So like the nature of our physical bodies is quite different from individual to individual. So we didn't realize that this is true, that we're not just vegetables, we have motivation. This motivation is what directs us outward toward experience and gives us inward impressions of the experience in the outer world. So it seems very clear that aurora is not just a bunch of flashy, shiny colors. It's made up of living feelings, and it describes our reality. And then the mystery wisdom claims that interpenetrating the aura, the body made of desire, feeling, especially centered around the upper part of the aura, is a light. And it's a light of reason. It's the ability to think. Because if we only had desires, we'd be very much like animals. Animals desire certain things and they go for those things. They have no reason to calculate, they have no reason hold back, deliberate, control their desires at all. The only time that we see control of desires are in domesticated animals, where we, as human beings, conductively bring a control of desires. And so, we as human beings are rather unique in that we have thought. And this thought is self-conscious. We not only desire to do things, or we not only receive impressions from the external world, we have a reason for doing what we do. And we try to understand the meaning behind everything we do. From a spiritual point of view, even a rock has a meaning. It's not silly. Some folks think to contemplate a rock. Realize most people do that. You must watch us too much. You realize that if you take the rock apart, that everything that is in there has been designed by an engineer, and you certainly not. But we realize that if something is wrong with the watch, you just can't throw it away apart. You realize that everything that is in that watch has a meaning. Because we know that human consciousness has built it and it's very purposeful. The thing that we need now to realize is that everything in existence has thoughts behind it. And that there is logic to a cloud, and meaning to a cloud, to a stone, or to a person's behavior. That by the power of thought, understand a rationale behind existence. Now this describes quite a bit of the function of the human being. but it doesn't describe essential. Some people don't think that the essential is there. Other people believe that all of this is the result of interactions of chemicals. They interact differently, that consciousness would be very different. It's described in itself. But the very fact that there is a thought, and that this thought leads to truth, there is an assumption in that. And it's an assumption that I'm making in doing these talks. I'm assuming that there is a spiritual intelligence, a truth knower that is within the mind. And that truth knower is the being that creates the stuff we experience and comes to know the meaning or the truth of things that exist. So what we're talking about now is a spiritual intelligence, the spirit of being, the spirit of truth, the spirit of knowing. But when we're talking about this, we're talking about something altogether different from everything we've spoken of previously. So we've spoken of the physical world, and the interpenetrating desire world, and we talked about a concrete mind, a mind that has definite thoughts. These thoughts are concrete, conclusions, beginning and end, and they're durable. We can examine them beginning to end with any perspective, and not quite exactly as you would have object, but it's concrete. Now, mystery wisdom teaches that beyond the concrete mind are real spiritual worlds begin. But that everything from that point on is completely transformed. All we've been speaking of are phenomenal worlds. So now you see the difficulty of our language. Because our language is built completely on consciousness. It's not at all geared for understanding universals. For the most part, we're protected. Because most of us spiritually are not ready for these worlds. Even so much as experiencing the etheric or the desire world, if we have taken away from us the protection of limited thought that our dense body provides for us, we took away the numbing, insulating effect of physical, it would be more difficult for us to stand. Because it would be so universal. Construct yourself on love. Construct yourself perfectly wonderful state. So the fact is that you have to die for that. It is just in our physical world, because most people are not good at that. The spiritual world is disorienting. It's a totally different kind of consciousness than most people know. But still, even all of that is extremely phenomenal. It's limited. And the limitation is the way we're growing. Is that by beginning to understand simple things, then expanding consciousness will gradually grow out into wider and wider, and we are healing consciousness as we proceed. So what we're talking about here is that focusing mind focuses us in the physical existence. On the other side about that, we're talking about things that are so utterly holy that only we have purified very strong spiritual awakening before we dare even to talk about it. The only reason I thought it was because I'm audacious. And all the other qualities I just taught. And we'll do with that. Spiritual consciousness cannot be personal. That, yes, we can have an individuality. To have a personal God is a non-reality. Now, one of the qualities of the spiritual worlds of universality is we have experiences of it in other senses. Like when we experience an ionic solution, we take pure distilled water and we put something that is non-ionic in it. Suppose we put a little bit of sugar in it. And a few moments later, we take out drops of water, various parts of the water, we're going to find the sugar everywhere in the water. And for a long time, the sugar really doesn't get dissolved in the water. But if we put salt in the water, a very few moments later, the salt permeates throughout the entire water. Because there is an ionic dissolution of the salt into its three parts, the ions. And they travel rapidly through the very structure of the water and part of the water, so that if you have one drop of that water, you have the whole tank of the water. Almost immediately after you put the salt in, the ions travel very, very quickly. Something like this is what the spiritual worlds are like. We have to be careful. It's like a gigantic solution. And everything that is in that solution is everywhere at the same time. Every idea that we can conceive in our ideation of consciousness is everywhere in existence in the cosmos at the same time. And that's what you can't say, like it's automatically infinite. You can't say that 1 plus 1 equals 2 doesn't apply anywhere else or in any other realm. Or that the area of a circle is pi r squared. These are ideas that are universal that you just can't, in the physical we define them as axioms. In that sense they're tautological. But in spirit, they are. They're everywhere. And we can symbolize them by formulae, but in the spiritual worlds, to have an idea, conceive or perceive an idea, is to know it everywhere. Okay. You see the type of difficulty that we're having. We're looking at something that is infinite. Very, and we can't talk about it very well. Now, there are some things about it that are really wonderful. And some things that make it simpler to deal with the subject. In this physical world, we deal with probably the most complex of all the worlds. The very fact that we can only see it from without, and only see it from without a limited or destructive outlook. We can't see it from all sides at the same time, all the layers within this physical object. We're very much limited, and that adds complexities. It adds complexities so that we have to, if we're describing an object, that's a circle, everybody would say, no, it's not. And they'd say, yes, it is. It's a circle turned on end. That adds a complexity. The perspective that you're looking at it from becomes very, very complex. And so the physical world, all of the things that science loves to deal with, is the most complex of all of the spiritual worlds. Such that when we get into something like the desire world, things are complicated. There are lots of feelings existing at the same time. Past feelings and present feelings exist at once. But there is a quality of knowing. You know, like you can't have an ignorant conception like God is dead, or there is no God of these spiritual worlds, because taken away some of the blindness and some of the numbness, complexities are not diminished, but things are more easily seen through, so that one can see the truth of the matter. When we come to the spiritual worlds, pattern perception of them is direct. You know that we don't see the physical world directly. We see the physical world upside down. The spiritual consciousness that is in us rectifies it. Because our eye is a lens. We know physics that lenses invert. If you want to try an experiment, it's been done. It's a kind of basic experiment to do. But you can wear glasses. Come out here somewhere. And when you wear those glasses, they're associated with the focal length of your eye. You see everything upside down. As though people were walking on the sky. And you do that for about 3 days. And then your spiritual consciousness rectifies. You see the right side up again. And this is what happens to us. A little baby hasn't learned this yet. If you can call back infant memories, not only is it a matter of upside down, but the associations of one thing to another are tremendously confused. And the distortion of perspective, to learn to see it as the convention of this world is seen, takes a long time to learn that. The funny thing is, when you take the glasses off, you have to take another few days to see people upside down again until the consciousness writes things. Yeah, psychologists have done experiments like that. But so we see things indirectly. With our eyes, we see then an inverted image on the retina, and then we take that to the brain and back into the spiritual consciousness, and from there that tells us what's wrong. We're not seeing it through it. When you're in the transcendental worlds, you see things directly. There is a grammatical slang that we use a lot. People say, I can identify with that. That is really excellent slang. I like the language a lot. I like the misuses of it as well as the proper use of it. In some cases, I think slang is much more accurate than in others. In some cases, it isn't. In some cases, words become very one word catch-all for many things. These days, that all adverbs are real. The ly is drawn. It's really, it's real. That's real good. You hear that a lot. But identification is the process of realization in the spiritual worlds. Things are direct, so that someone in the spiritual world can say, I am the sun and the moon. And they're not lying. You see, this leads to problems of language. Because, our language isn't suited for something like that. We want to put somebody away if they say, I am the sun and the moon. And you say, yes, Christ, let us help you try on this little white jacket. will fit you just perfectly. But in the spiritual realms, in the transcendental consciousness, there is no limit. In fact, even to talk about things like planets is other than as 7 ideas, and if those 7 ideas are part of our being in ourselves, then we are it directly. We directly experience, we do not need perception. We are it. And so, all right, I don't know how to say it any more. So in the spiritual world, everything is much simpler. If you have an idea, that idea can have many conclusions and deductions and manifestations in all of the phenomenal worlds. But in the spiritual realms, the transcendental realms, when you understand an idea, you understand it in its whole. And when you understand it in its whole, you can make all the deductions you want. In fact, you have to be careful that you don't get led away in deductions, because that again makes your consciousness courses it, puts it back into phenomenal expressions of something, rather than identifying and being with, or as the biblical statement goes, to sit in the throne of consciousness, to sit in the throne of God. Whenever you run into that phrase in the Bible or any other spiritual book, sitting in the throne means that you are seated in the center of consciousness, and things, like you're in a sound place. So everything is very simple, and everything is very, very direct. It leads to big misunderstandings because self and God are co-spatial. They're co-temporal. But they're not completely identical. That the focus or outlook of God Susan, God Ima, is not the same as God in the grammar Almighty. And so that even though our consciousness, we feel ourselves as God, and we extend to the limits of creation, divine or transcendental worlds, we have to be careful of the illusion of the outlook and of the realization and the awakening of our microcosm. Microcosm in this case doesn't mean smaller, it means degree of awakening or degree of realization. So that the more realized we become, the more godlike, or the more our consciousness approaches that divine. Something now that's very, very heavy. So, but some people, if you're used to this kind of consciousness, and suddenly you're working very hard for meditation, and somehow you shake yourself free of the insecure grasping of the physical world, and you let go, and you find yourself in a transcendent realm of consciousness, you have to be careful, because it isn't immediately clear. That's the tricky thing about all the spiritual worlds, that even in the fire world or your theory realm, if you're conscious there, doesn't mean you know everything there. Yeah, because you can have a very good, we're all awake in the physical world, we have a perception of the physical world, that doesn't mean we know everything. I can't look at a planet and say, it's good for you just by looking at it. Or I can tell a little bit at what stage of evolution that kind of consciousness is at. I can tell whether a plant is sick or something like that, in just the physical sense. But we don't know even the physical world. And so what happens is a lot of people have bona fide, you cannot deny it, you have so overwhelming to know that you are God. And some people, when they come back to living their personal existence again, don't realize that progressive thickening or awakening, even in the same realms that you're working in all the time, in the transcendental realms, and they feel more powerful with the Supreme, the Almighty. And some of these people actually act as though they created the whole cosmos, everything in it. They get side by side. It very often happens. The personality is not very well developed, not very well educated. In fact, it's more likely to happen then because the educated people are educated into a lot of misconceptions and they hang on to it, keeps them from a true state of enlightenment. And so suddenly you have this great awareness brought into sometimes a superstitious personality. And here you'll have this profound spiritual awakening through all of this really humbug understanding of the world. So like, what I'm trying to say is, there are a lot of things that are around that are being said, and they're coming from true spiritual experience. That doesn't mean that the understanding of them is true. Now, there are problems with all of this in other ways, because phenomenal worlds are the worlds of creatures. Even though there are angels and archangels and other high beings functioning in phenomenal worlds, anything that is done in the transcendental worlds is created. This is kind of unusual. It's very vexing to have a conversation with someone like Socrates. It's very vexing to have a conversation with Krishnamurti. Because Krishnamurti is very honest. He says, I have a terrible memory. And that is my intention. He has schooled himself not to focus his attention on the memory. But what he is instead trying to do is as continuously as possible be living in the transcendent realms. He's trying to be continuously in a meditative state. And the consequence of that is that he's creative. And you can always tell something that comes from a very deeply spiritual source, that it is creative in its nature and in relating to it. It's like reading the Bible or a deeply spiritual book. Every time you come back to it and read it, it reads like a totally different book. And if you try to have a conversation with somebody like Krishnamurti and ask him to repeat himself, forget it. He will not repeat himself. Yeah, some folks do. I'm not trying to cast these versions of memory, but it's always new. It's always renewed. It's never a dead experience. The world is always live, and it's always so. And this is extremely demanding. Some people think that to have a high spiritual consciousness is to like loll around lazily in heaven and do nothing. It comes easier, but still it is part of the reality that in the same way that we have the responsibility of perfection here in the physical, and everything is eventually going to break down. We have gravity, we can't fly away. The responsibility of all the transcendental realms is such that we must always be creating in them. To live in a spiritual state is to never move. And again, you find there are people around that are always new. Every time you see them, you never know what to expect. Even if you're going back to something old, it's always different. So, we're about ready to look at some spiritual states, transcendent worlds. So, we're looking at a world that's simple. It's not an inane simplicity. It's not a watered-down simplicity. It is a simplicity. There is a corollary in the world, but in this world. There are some people that have developed a very simple self-honesty. And in this simple self-honesty, they confront themselves in the real world, it's this word confrontation, with a direct, perfect honesty. And many of the complexities, the neurotic difficulties that a lot of people have are dissolved immediately, like try to raise objections to something. And such it just doesn't work. Because that simplicity is there. You try to say, that's just shallow simplicity. But there is a depth there that persisting in that simple, but deeply simple consciousness, all of the objections are overcome in a very straightforward manner. And that is a reflection of what it is like in the spiritual worlds to understand the simplicity of being. So, we're about ready to look into something that is hard to do because we can't talk about facets of God, something like that, because that deals with a conception that is limited. And when you're dealing with unity and simple unity and directness, you can't have something that is partial. So, when we're talking about states of spiritual reality, sometimes in some terms they're talked about like planes. There are spiritual planes interpenetrating the other planes. You can talk in that language. But if you do, you must remember that it's only a gimmick. And it's only a gimmick to give a intellectual, mental conception to meditate on, so that the experience can be gained by focusing on that truth in its subject state. No, you can visualize it, except light. The lights get turned on. You have an idea. It's such that there is a light. And the stronger that light is, the easier it is to look at it. And it's a light that has the quality of truth to it. It has the quality of light to it. But, so to talk about it, to understand the and so the parallels are like the parallels of dealing with the mathematics of infinities in series. That it's a wonderful thing to take a calculus course, take a course in series or a number of things are dealt with. You learn that there are a number of different kinds of infinities. They all go on infinitely, or it's hard to carry them. They each have characteristics. And manipulate is relative to each other, almost like manipulating numbers. Four goes 7 equals 4, which is split up this way and that way, and have a little left over, and things like that. You can manipulate attributes. What we're talking about transcendent spiritual being. Or Venus, we're talking about attributes. We're talking about spiritual consciousness. We're talking about characteristic of the divine. And characteristic of the divine can be directly experienced as a quality all of its own. Just as Paul said when he was talking about his experience in heaven. He said, I knew a man about 7 years ago, whether in the body or out, I know not. He was talking about being there in heaven, and he didn't even know, he knew there was no longer any personality. He says, there is a glory to the sun, and the glory to the moon. When he's talking about these glories, he's not talking about seeing a ball there. He's talking about this quality. He's talking about an attribute or a characteristic of the infinite. And that characteristic is itself infinite. So, there are mathematics essentially has to do with these ideas of mathematics. The aggregates position consciousness anywhere in space just consciousness. If a number of points of together line, that line represents many points of consciousness. It represents the direction of the line of thought. If that line happens to connect itself in a circle, that indicates its visual, its sphere of consciousness. That is, it's like a point position in consciousness. This is a position in consciousness in space or in sphere encompasses a large area. It's a point line circle representing the basic elements of understanding consciousness. And those lines are understood in segments, because if you want to carry a line on an infinite way, you would have to have our consciousness infinitely directed. And if we had our consciousness directed in a line, it's a long tangent. And full balance, reality, consciousness in a circle, it's lost. It's lost on track line. So when we understand lines, in order to understand characteristics of lines, or what they mean, or what they symbolize, consciousness of our being. We look at segments. Suppose we put together intersections of different lines of infinite consciousness. Then we have 3 directions of consciousness and actors. And this is to say that they come that cross each other, such as three foci, and that these three points and the vertices of the triangle represent special foci of consciousness that represent these three lines of thought relative that they are set down, or if I say that there's something manifest, there's something complete, something final. Now it turns out that 3 is the least number of lines that have space. So if we're trying to have a one-pointed consciousness which is frozen together like an harmonic atom, or we're not wanting a line that goes off at infinity, but we're wanting to have something knowable, something that is put in such a way that the infinite possibility of all space can be captured and objectified. The least number of lines is 3 lines. And spiritual mathematicians from this realize that 3 attributes are what is necessary to, in directed lines of consciousness, understand the manifestation of the spirit in space. So in this way, the consciousness of spiritual reality is threefold. Humans and divine beings that manifest in any way at all, no matter what spiritual reality, beyond anything you are capable of experiencing at this point in evolution, manifest as threefold beings. And this threefoldness is the simplest way to manifest something that is spiritual in a way that is objectively verifiable without having to come into limitations of destruction which are associated with squares. Like the phenomenal worlds. The phenomenal worlds are the world of squares where there are destructions and limitations, and the objective reality of spiritual worlds is the world of triangles. I'm speaking a little bit symbolically because it's very difficult to live these ideas out in words for me and say the understanding of it. It seems like sometimes I get just a little bit of a glimpse of the reflection of what this consciousness is like. So that any spiritual being that is an aware, latent, objective spiritual being is full. And we say that the waking spirit, whether it is a human or an angel or whatever kind of being, is threefold. It's sometimes called, I don't like the word in terms of modern usage, it's called the threefold ego. That's not a really good usage because ego has more to do these days with the small e of a personal self, which is like every man for himself kind of consciousness. It's a very selfish kind of consciousness. So, but what we're talking about now are 3 attributes and 3 qualities of the spirit that are necessary for it to objectify itself and for it to know itself and objectify itself and create in these 3 outlets. And whether it is a human being or whether it is an angel or an archangel, this is necessary. Okay. Now these are associated, again, with planes of stuff. But the stuff, in the case of the spirit, isn't as important as the spirit. When we're down here, the form of a desire is important. When we're dealing with things in the spirit, it is more the spirit of it that is important than the form. As I said, it's so hard because we don't have words to say what I really want to say. I'm going to reverse the course of things. When we introduced this talk, we started from the physical world of experience, and we worked backwards into more and more antecedent states of our being. Now, from the transcendent realms, let's start with the deepest part of our spiritual being. It's called the divine spirit. The world is also called the world of divine spirit. This is the simplest, the most mysterious, profound state of existence that we as human beings can now experience. And most of us can't now experience it because it takes quite a bit of awakening. There are those things that people say, quoting the Bible, that you can't argue with them because they're truisms. The way they're stated is trite. Like if you say God is love, or God is light, one cannot argue with that. You know, how are you going to argue against something like that? But who says them is as important as what is being said. For somebody who is shallow and who is not in the spirit, for them to say, God is love. It's a sort of a la-di-da sort of thing, because the character of the person saying that is shallow. And it doesn't carry the existential power of being a living reality. And for someone who is profoundly awakened and profoundly in the spirit to say God is love it's a profound experience. But all of those attributive statements to say God is love, or God is light, or God is the Spirit, are not really applicable to the divine Spirit. An even better way would be a shorter sentence. God is. There is simply being. In the subtlest and rarest, most profound way, it's kind of hard to knock being. You know what I'm saying? It is. That being is the nature of the divine spirit, or the attribute of the divine spirit. It is by intention what is the divine intends to be. And that is what causes all being to exist. It is by intention. but it's paradoxical also because it intends to because it has to. When you're talking about things that are this high, logic always becomes paradoxical. Strangely enough, I'll quote a very unusual source as it comes to mind. I was strictly influenced by the beatnik days. Everybody in beatnik days had to beat Jack Kerouac's On the Road. And he opens up the book saying, "This book is so fantastic, so beautiful, that it can't not be read, or can't not be written." And this quality of being, the will to be, is something that can't not be. What I'm trying to say, it's at the same time the deepest intention of our cosmos as we know it, but as intentional as it is still not arbitrary, but still mandatory and necessary. Well, the will to be, even though it's willing to be by intention, cannot will to not be. Because it must. What I'm trying to say, all right, I don't want to get too much into logical conundrums because that defeats what I'm trying to say. So no, it's not. Don't forget about that. Yeah. So this is creative will, and it's so subtle. You realize from all this that we've talked about all these weeks, that the more subtle something is, the more powerful it is. A thought is much more powerful than a desire because a thought can change a desire. One thought can change an entire society for centuries. If it's a true thought, if it's an accurate, appropriate thought, can change the consciousness of humanity for centuries. So when we're dealing with the power of will, we're dealing with that state of existence which is very subtle. So subtle that it is understood, but it is not necessarily seen. Because giving it an attribute or trying to see it through an attribute of visibility would diminish its subtlety. That's why it's associated with darkness, with silence, like a hard, powerful arbitrariety. But these are, again, anthropomorphizations of something that's terribly powerful. Of course, this cannot, the will to be has to come to life. And when it is a lively being, it is called the life spirit. And this means that existence, which just is capable of existence, or is capable of, in the most broad, amorphous way conceivable to our intelligence right now, is capable of a plastic Venus. If you have existence, and that existence comes into Venus, it becomes lively. There's something about the quality of the divine spirit, if you just get the feel of it, that is static. It is. But when it becomes lively, when it comes to life, not swimming around, but in existing itself, or in Venusing itself, it becomes the life spirit. Now, this is understood easier by looking from a different outlook. Will is understood through imagination, because the receptivity of the quality of imagination is pliable, formable, and experienceable of the will. You never see the will itself, but you see the effect of the will in the potential of imaginative manifestation. You don't have to imagine a thing, but you have to imagine the possibility of an imagination that can imagine a thing. You understand what I'm trying to say? It is that kind of receptivity. And in terms of the consciousness, it is such that you can't tell whether the imagination is drawing the will out or the will is forming the imagination. Because when you're looking at things in the transcendent consciousness, you're looking at attributes of a unity. We're talking about a trinity within a unity. And so therefore, whether the imagination is drawing out the will and the will is just something that is there almost like a gilded ox, that it's creative only in producing its own existence, and that the imaginative consciousness pulls it out because it can't do it itself, that's the way we look from the attribute of the life spirit. Whereas from the attribute of the divine spirit, it would be willing itself, and it would be willing itself into an imagination, or into an imaginability. To look at some of the other things, if there is a darkness that is associated with the divine spirit, light is associated with the life spirit. Because power is so subtle you can't see it. But the most simple manifestation of power is an invisible light. And that sounds like another conundrum again, but it is a light that in the seeing of it, none of it is changed, none of it is subdued in the seeing of it. That's what I mean by invisible light. Now, some of these ideas are just so hard to bring across. I'm spinning for a few days afterwards because the material is so hard to cover. And you start awakening yourself, and you get so excited, and the ideas just come thronging back again and again and again, and how to conceptualize something that is that awesome and that wonderful is the most exciting type of thing. So then, when that feeling of that awesome, terrible power of the Father takes form, it is like a relief. And that relief, or the intention of being, when it is freed, you might say, from that arbitrary isness, we're looking for the viewpoint of the life spirit now, it feels like love. This is why the life spirit, which is associated with Christ consciousness, is associated with the universal love. It is an attribute of existence that seems like love. That love is what we call that freedom within the terrible all-being. But all of these things would be a matter, and now I'm going to say something that's almost shocking in its down-to-earth phenomenality. All of these things would always be only a matter of black and white. If we have arbitrary existence at Venus without there being a focus, a third focus that ties it down. For example, if you were to blacken the entire blackboard and have nothing but this one spot in, and sit in the front row and look only at that spot would explode on you. It's been proved again in psychological labs. That spot would, it would seem to enlarge, it would seem to just jump all over the place. To focus on one spot is almost an impossible thing to do within our psyche. To focus on two spots, something similar happens. If you just sit there and try to look at only those two spots, your consciousness would break from them. And it would pull out like that, or like that. Those two spots, as a psychological experience, just focusing on two spots with nothing else, plain background. If you look at two spots, they delineate, they pull away in a linear fashion in your consciousness. The least number of spots that you can keep a focus on, that you can pin things down, these three spots. Sit there in that front chair and you can look at those three spots without them exploding on you or running off in lines or something like that. Yeah, this is hundreds and hundreds of people. They've had to do this experiment and they report their experiences. And this is what comes of it. And so there is something of a spiritual finality about the number 3, the idea of the number 3. And so what we're trying to say is that if there is and if that which is has Venus, a life of Venus that is formable in the most fluid way possible, the next logical step, or cosmological step, is Venus must become a being. And when it becomes a being, you then have that third point. And that being is self. Not in a personal sense, this is mine or that's mine, but in intelligence, knowing intelligence, in such a way that intelligence, knowing intelligence, can create, can manifest something definite. It is as if to say the divine spirit, which is associated with the Father, and the light spirit, which is associated with the imagination as the Mother, when they come into union, that has to be fruitful in creating a being. We're talking here about what is called by all of the transcendental philosophers is called immaculate conception. This was a phrase that was used well before the birth of Jesus. We were talking about the birth of selfhood. We were talking about the birth of God. Both of them are created at the same time. You cannot conceive of self without conceiving of God, without conceiving of self as God. You can have a thought about a personal ego, but that is not conceiving God. Because when you think in terms of personal egos, you always think in terms of bodies. You always think in terms of behavior. But when you think in terms of direct being, like there's somebody alive in there, you know what I mean? When you think in terms of direct being, you cannot think of anything but God. I don't know how to say it any other. God's were created with His knowledge. Yes. And not only that, going back to what we said earlier, they're constantly recreated. Continuously recreated. It's always food. It's always life. There is no death in that. Even, death is something we only know in the physical. But even thoughts, after a while, disintegrate. But when you have a continuous existence in the spiritual worlds, it's continuously going on. And that's why it's so baffling. We have so much security and insecurity tied into being able to have the beginning and end of an experience, that death is very much of a blessing, even death of the physical or death of a line of thought, that it freaks us out to think of continuous, like if you understand a landscape, or if you understand the meaning of an idea, there's a wonderful feeling that everything lightens up. It is, you suck in your breath and everything else. Like for most people, to think of that going on forever is you know what I'm saying? Is just too much for most people.
Our eternal life, what our eternal life is our life frames that we create in our living, extend out.
That's thought about in a physical sense. We're talking about completely. Okay. So I don't know how to say anything. I'm getting at the point where to say anything more would be too much. So these conceptions are called ideas. Some people call them abstract thoughts, which is a bad term, because a lot of people around now have empty abstractions that aren't at all talking to about something transcendental. And according to the mystery wisdom, there are 3 levels of abstract or ideational thought. First we have willing up here, then we have imagining, we have power and fight. We have 3 levels of forming ideas. And the forming of ideas is reflective thought, where being knows being, meaning principal idea being the idea of self, the idea of God, the idea of God as self. Again, the deeper into our nature we go, the more we get into subtler and rarer and simpler things. But they're deeper. And some of these this is a mirror image. When we're thinking, the mind, which is where the concrete mind and the ideational consciousness come together, works as a dual lens and a dual mirror. I won't get complicated about it, but as a lens, it is a variable focal length lens, and it can function differently using different focal lengths. That's what we're looking at right now. There are two types of reflection, and there is a assimilative thought and a projective thought. Let's take the simplest kind of reflection. Let's call it phenomenal reflection or automatic thinking. Somewhere something happens out in the world, and we have a thought. We come to it. We, as the spiritual intelligence, come to a conclusion about an experience in the external world, and we form a thought about what to do. And for most people, that activity is done very early in life. It's finished and it's complete. After that, most people function on automatic pilot because it takes too much time to think every time and come to a conclusion every time. Some people consider it inefficient. So what happens is we have a lower mind, sometimes called an instinctual mind, and it's associated astrologically with the reflective qualities of the moon.
Do you relate that to adolescence and how?
I don't want to go into those. I just want to shoot because we're running late. Okay. It's something too long to go into right now. We're going to go into it in future talks. We're going to talk about the timing of it. So something is happening out here. We just take it back into our sense perception. We reflect it off of the mind without thinking, and we automatically respond. That is the simple kind of reflection. That is thoughtless thought, you might say. It is automacy. The other kind of thinking that is reflective thought is deeper reflective thought, and that is where we will and imagine and conceive an idea and then just bring that idea back into selfhood in all of our layers of being. That is the immaculate conception kind of ideation. It's the deepest kind of thinking that we have. A projective thought is where we take that same conception and then focus it into reality, into the world. It's like we draw on our deepest being and we consciously all the way through bring that into being right into this world. And assimilative thought is where we experience something in the external world and then we get the impression of it in the desire body, and we get the reason behind it in the concrete mind, and then it is taken back into the spirit, and it is a spiritualized conception of a limited experience which is sort of a soul for our spiritual being. Alright, those are four modes of using the mind. We're going to come back to them again and again because I've gotten a little bit too far out. But this means some ideas are more important than others. Or some ideas are very much different than others. I'll just talk about a few little conceptions. This says that the deepest ideas are the ideas of form. Ideas of life, ideas of this says the idea about the receptivity of this chair, or the idea of a mathematical form, is a much deeper idea than the idea of an emotion. Suppose it's even a romantic emotion, an emotion of adoration. The idea that it takes to conceive a mathematical conception is a deeper, more subtle kind of ideation than that is associated with emotion. This is really a curious notion, a very, very curious notion, and right here at the crux, where we talked 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, Thanksgiving, where we talked about archetypal, the region of archetypes, thoughts about thoughts. When we take an idea, we're compounding. When we have thoughts and all the experiences of the phenomenal world, we do things by division. The best example is cell division. We build a body by dividing cells again and again and again. In the spiritual world's creation is not brought about by division, but by unification. All kinds of different ideas of form are put together to produce a shape. And that leads to ideas of life. And then that leads to ideas of a mood. And then there is finally an idea, the simplest idea of all, is the idea of manifest existence. And when you give something the idea of manifest existence, that is what is used to project it through the lens into actuality, which is really not actuality. The real actuality is here, but to bring it into the world of concrete living. What does that is, the finalizing idea is the idea that, hey, this can be. And when you take that idea that this can be, that shoots it into the phenomenal worlds, and it becomes in its limited existence. And when it becomes in its limited existence, it then lives more in a realm of forms of thought, or forms of, rather than a world of meanings. That's the way the whole world is materialized. It is by the divine saying, it can be. Now, when these ideas are put together, these are not just mathematical ideas. All of these ideas, this is where it gets really strange when you read religious texts, especially the more ancient they become. All of these ideas are divinities. So this triangle, so like when we were talking about this triangle of the three foci, it's associated with divine beings, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They represent the divine equilateral, the points on the divine equilateral triangle, but even the idea of triangularity is a divine being. So that any time that you're ideating, you are working together and unifying and compounding with the Elohim, with the gods. And from that, we as human beings are very special, because we as human beings are the only beings that can take this stuff, these ideas, and we can project them all the way into the physical world and know the nature of the outcome of them by seeing them in their illusory forms, which is really a state of more non-being. There are so many paradoxes in here that by the non-being of this type of existence, the spirit is fed in its beingness and its existence. It's really strange to me that it's so hard. We are all feeding off of the illusions, or I should say the illusory nature. But when we're creating, the point I want to get across is that the central most idea that it's possible for it to be manifest, because that is the very state of what the experiencing of self-consciousness is. If you'll note that if you have an idea about something, like when the lights go on, you will realize that at that same moment that you realize the truth of something, you also realize self in the most divine way possible. And when you realize self, you also realize God. So that when somebody has what is called the baptism of the Holy Spirit, it is like the realization of a mathematical thought, but what it really is a realization of self and God as self, and God knowing to itself that it can create, saying, hey, I can't make this. I can't do this. All of those kinds of feelings, when you have those experiences, or even when a child is beginning to have those experiences, those are the beginnings of divine awakening in a spiritual sense.
Incorporated the fire of love in your heart, mercy.
I'll pass on that. Most people, yeah. Most people think something through a few times until it becomes habitual and they quit thinking. For many people, their thinking is over at the age of 30. I'm talking about the mass of people. Yes. And most people quit by the time they're in their mid-30s. They think no new thoughts. And this is why civilization changes so slowly. And it's hard because there's a tremendous responsibility in thinking and ideating and knowing the truth about something. Okay, I have lots of other notes here, but I don't want to go into any more information because it will take away from the spirit of what we've been in. I do want to talk about two more things. There are realms of being that go beyond this. The transcendence of the divine spirit comes to what is called virgin spirit, or sometimes called monadic. It is called that because it always remains virgin. That before there was even the possibility of Venus or self, there was a virgin state. And that virgin state is not lost. And the virgin state is called the watcher. And the watcher produces the apex point of the tetrahedron that is third dimension. Triangle. It's a triangle of all equilateral triangles. In two dimensions, it symbolize the oratorio behind the triangle. I'm not going to try and talk about the experiencing of this, but will manifest through watching. Watching something into existence. Watching the will imagine is the way everything transpires. This says something really, really interesting. This says that behind every psychological state, there's a very, very deep, deep meaning, such that if you have voyeurism, where people like to be watchers of other people and not participate themselves, this is a psychological malady, but that psychological malady is a misfocus of something very, very, very profound. The way spiritual worlds are realized is by transcendence. If we concentrate our thinking, we transcend to the thinker, which is what the experience of spiritual selfhood is thinking. That's why all of these exercises where a person focuses on something very, very closely, either with their eyes, or they visualize something, or they think something out. After a while of doing that, one transcends. And all spiritual realization, going deeper and deeper into the spiritual worlds, is a process of transcending. The state beyond the virgin spirit, where to our consciousness transcendence transcends to transcendence of itself, is called, at least in Western terms, it's called the world of God. And the consciousness of that is in the statement, God